Is this thing working? Are we live? Looks like it's working. Looks like we might be live. What's happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic whatever day you're watching this. So, Turbo Chat. One of the reasons why I wanted to throw this out there was because, well, that's the direction everybody is going right now. You've got to remember, hold on just a second. Let me turn the volume down on this phone as I am being blown up on a text message. I love you, my wife, my beautiful wife. But no, one of the things that I have found is that when you're talking about a new power plant, a lot of guys are getting really worked up about the fact there's not going to be a new Hemi. Now, that's perfectly fine, provided that the 6-cylinder twin turbo mill that's replacing it is economical, that it is durable, that it is powerful, but that it is honest, at least with its power output, at least its claims and the type of fuel that you need to use. And well, let's dive into that a little bit, but I also want to talk about what makes turbos work so well, what the basic kind of rule of thumb is when you're sizing turbos. And when you're talking about turbos, why is it that they always outperform supercharged applications? Well, so let's dive into it. First of all, turbochargers are the ultimate cheat code. That's why manufacturers will typically go that direction when you're looking to try to build the most efficient amount of power that you can. Look at all of the diesel engines that you see driving around on the street. None of those are naturally aspirated and none of those are supercharged. I'm talking about big rigs here. There's nothing that is more efficient than a turbocharger when it comes to making actual power. And because of that, OE manufacturers know that if they need to make something that needs to work for long periods of time at sustained, steady rates, you cannot beat a turbocharger, especially if you've got to make a ton of torque. Now, why is that? Well, primarily because turbochargers are driven off of the exhaust of the engine. What a lot of folks don't seem to realize is that there is a ton of power in the exhaust of an engine. To give you an example, between 60 and 80 PSI are exiting the exhaust valve whenever that thing opens up. In other words, when the exhaust valve opens up on your gasoline engine at wide open throttle, you are letting go about 80 PSI of pressure every time one of those exhaust valves opens up. That is energy that can be used for work. Now, contrast that with any of the normal superchargers. Now, keep in mind, a turbocharger is, yes, technically a supercharger, but for purposes of this chat, we're just going to say that a supercharger is anything that is driven off of the crankshaft. Well, it takes power to make that work. But more importantly, it takes the actual power stroke of the piston to turn the crank, to then turn the supercharger to make power. It is a direct parasitic loss. Whereas with a turbocharger, the power stroke is completely unaffected. It's only the exhaust stroke that's affected when you are extracting the power. It's a major point when you're talking about the efficiency of that system. And it's a point that a lot of folks tend to forget or simply don't realize it. But that's what makes turbochargers so effective. Their power stroke is completely oblivious to the fact that there is a compressor that engine is turning. It's just putting power to that crankshaft. But it's the efficiency of the whole thing. And that's the whole reason behind why they use turbochargers, especially now. Now, there are times where superchargers work, but keep in mind that anytime you're running a compressor off of the crankshaft, it's susceptible to the same atmospheric Achilles heel that a naturally aspirated engine would have, in that for every 1,000 feet of elevation you go up, you're going to lose about 3% of the power. Now, with a turbocharger, you're not going to be affected by that. Up until the point where you are literally so high in altitude, or the density altitude is literally so high that the compressor itself, the turbo simply cannot gather up enough air to make manifold pressure. And at that point, it just basically reverts back to where a supercharged engine would be in the same predicament. You lose 3% power as you go up in altitude. Now, it's not exactly a free lunch. You have to remember that with a turbocharger, as you go up in altitude, your turbo has to spin faster to create that same amount of manifold pressure. Well, you have to do the same thing with a supercharger anyway. And when you have to spin those turbochargers or superchargers faster, they generate more heat. So as long as your heat extraction, in other words, your aftercooler system, whether it's liquid, water, doesn't matter, liquid to air, whatever the case is, as long as it can extract heat to the point where you're not faced with a knock threshold, sky's the limit. And realistically, that's how guys will look at when they're building a turbo application, whether it's for an industrial application, agricultural application, commercial application, race application, whatever the case is. You can size the turbo basically however you like. And then as long as charge cooling is adequate and engine cooling is adequate, oiling is adequate for the turbos, you've got now an engine that will make its rated and target horsepower regardless of altitude and regardless of density altitude. And that's why turbochargers are such the cheat code. So at any rate, I wanted to talk to you guys about that. If you've got questions about turbo stuff, let's dive into that. And I'll get the sizing of the turbo and stuff like that here in just a second. But let me check in with you guys. Hard Rock is in. DM is in. Got the bald guy with the shades and the flex in the right cadence. First in gets it. Line is in. SCW's in. Say, I'm looking for a place to do a streetable cam for my Scat Pack, and I know you know. Yeah, give Pite's Performance a shout. PEITZ. Tell them I sent you, and you'll get one of my camshafts, or at least one of my camshaft specs will be in your car. Would a turbo be more efficient than a ProCharger? Yes, far way more efficient. However, it doesn't mean that it's better. It just means that by technical standards, it is more efficient. Sovereign saying, hey, B, Sovereign's got the flex and the shades, but TM beat you to it, brother. But how's it going? Hope things are good. And Sovereign Rome is in. Yeah, what's up, B? What's up, Rome? Gary is in. I have a 2017 Ticking Ram 1500. Was that problem with the warping manifolds ever resolved with the newer model 1500s? Yes, it was. Now they just crack instead of having the bolts break. That usually happens right around 60,000 miles, though, right when your warranty's going out. But technically speaking, yes, it has. Marco is in. What's up, man? Kool-Aid is in, saying, all hell from Central Florida. I like it. Very nice. So diving back into turbos. Guys, I've got a little bit of a past with turbocharging on the import side mainly. I got my start in tuning using Apex tuning software, and I was being taught by a group of guys that was campaigning an Integra. Or rather, I'm sorry, it was a CRX with an Integra engine and a 68 millimeter turbo on that four-cylinder. I'd never seen such a thing. I was a dyno operator at the time, very young, and I was absolutely mesmerized by this thing. By the way, it put down over 650 horsepower to the front tires. This thing was disturbingly fast. It was a mid 8-second car on just motor alone. It was nothing more really than a gutted shell with a roll cage and a set of slicks. It was fast, and I think the guy hit it. He didn't do this on the dyno, but I think he was also touching it up with a 200 shot of nitrous out the back door. So yeah, lots of power coming out of that thing. But that's where I got my start. And I started to really kind of get into it, although I didn't really stick with it because it was still a bit foreign territory. And at the time, I was more into the naturally aspirated Fords. But it at least got me to thinking more and more about turbos and how they can be more and more efficient than what it was that we were messing with. And it's kind of walking in lockstep because with some of my, well, then even at that time, very strong interest in warbird technology and turbocharging and what they would call turbo supercharging. What a lot of folks don't realize is that all of those aircraft engines back then were all centrifugally supercharged as a primary supercharger. Matter of fact, none of them didn't have those engines, at least those superchargers, at least not the ones you would think of. And there were these huge centrifugal superchargers. And you'd look at this thing and you would think that, oh my goodness, that thing is absolutely ridiculously sized. But then you remember that these things have to work at altitude. And well, that gets me into sizing your turbocharger properly. So when you're looking at sizing your turbocharger, there's a few things that you have to take into consideration. But the first thing and the main thing you're going to look at is how much power do I want to make out of this contraption? Realistically, what am I looking at? So if you're it's a pretty easy rule of thumb too. If you're looking at a combination and you want to make a very efficient, very safe 650 horsepower, get a 65 millimeter turbo. If you want to make an efficient and a safe, in other words, you're not overtaxing the turbo, you're not generating a ton more heat, etc. You want to make around 750, maybe 800 horsepower, gets you a 75 millimeter turbo. Carry it out for singles. It works just like that. If you're looking to make somewhere around, I don't know, 1,000 horsepower, maybe 1,100 horsepower, and you want to go about it with twins, well, just cut the size of that thing in half. Throw a pair of 58 millimeter turbos on there and let her eat. That's basically how that all works out. It's pretty simple. But the main thing is to not get overly, when you're talking about turbochargers, don't get overly aggressive and do not, whatever you do, think that bigger is better. It's not. Matter of fact, bigger can just be more of a pain in the ass, because if you're only looking to target and make, let's say with your combination, 30 pounds of boost, and you decide to go with a pair of 75 millimeter turbos, well, you won't be taxing those turbos necessarily depending on your build. So you'll have wasted a couple of turbos when you could have gone a lot smaller and had much more immediate response. So there's always a trade-off when it comes to turbocharger, but there's no replacement for a turbo when it comes to outright efficiency. So anyway, let me get back into you guys. Marco's in 6.4 Hemi turbo, 6 to 7 pounds. Would love it. Would absolutely love it. And keep in mind, yes, SCW Pipes is in Houston, Texas. Keep in mind that when you're talking about a turbocharger, remember, part of the gains that you get with turbo is in efficiency. It's in the fact that it has a lower parasitic loss. So what does that mean to you? Well, I'll put it to you like this. A positive displacement supercharger may take, well, let's use the Hellcat because it's a real easy, very familiar platform. That supercharger, realistically, I'm going to round up a little bit. It takes about 100 horsepower to make the 707 horsepower happen. So it takes about 100 horsepower to make that 10 pounds of boost work. The reason for that is you have, well, the load of the actual supercharger compressor. You have the inertial load also of accelerating those two large rotors. And you have throttling losses, and all of that contributes to about 100 horsepower. So what would it take to make the same amount of power with, say, a properly sized centrifugal supercharger? It would take about 70, give or take, to make the same type of power with a centrifugal supercharger, maybe even 65, depending on the design. So already you're expecting a little bit more power, and you'll get it out of that centrifugal supercharger. You lose the initial boost response. See what I mean? There's always a trade-off. Let's talk about turbos now. To make that same 700 horsepower with a set of turbos, would take somewhere in the range of about, say, 40, maybe even 30 to 40 horsepower. Let's call it 35 horsepower. And that is really more in the exhaust restriction that it may have. And it can vary quite a bit because it would depend on the size of turbos that you are using. So going off of what we were just talking about, if you used a 70 millimeter turbo, that would put it nice right in the middle of its fat efficiency range. You could use a 75, which is a much more common size. Anyway, you get the idea. And you're looking at an area now where you've got, for every pound of back pressure, of exhaust back pressure, you'd probably have a pound of boost. And that's kind of a fairly common trade-off. Sometimes you'll see a lot less. You try not to see much more than that. But in other words, you can see already that there is a significant efficiency gain. And it's not uncommon for big horsepower cars to see gains of 100, 130 horsepower plus, just by going from a centrifugal supercharger to turbos, or from especially going from a root style supercharger to twin turbos. Again, remember that there's always a trade-off. The turbos are going to have to spool up. And remember this, turbos don't like getting throttled, especially if they're sized too big. Start to throttle a turbo, you lose boost. And remember that it's the exhaust that feeds it. So there's always going to be a lag or a delay. It just depends on how big turbos are in relation to the displacement of the engine as far as how much of a lag there's going to be. So what do you get for the turbo? Well, you get the efficiency and the power, but you lose the drivability and you lose the manageability of that power. I mean, it's great under wide open throttle, but you can almost think of turbos, especially when you get into the racing application of these things. You can almost think of them as just mechanical nitrous oxide, except it's softer and it doesn't hit as hard, but you can't really throttle it. Like you wouldn't throttle nitrous because it would be too violent. Well, turbos, you can't really throttle them because if you throttle them a couple of times and you don't have an anti-lag, it's just going to be soft until it gets back into boost. Demonology, what is up? So Demonology is asking, is the cam you designed for me good with turbos? Absolutely, it's good with turbos. Remember that turbocharging, any type of supercharging, is simply going to be a reflection of what that engine is going to offer, regardless of the camshaft. There's some school of thought that guys like to spread that LSA out a little bit farther with turbos. That aids in getting more exhaust to the turbo to get it to spool up a little bit quicker. The camshaft that you have is already fairly wide, and it works that way because we're looking to build boost response with a positive displacement supercharger. And we're also looking to stretch that power out further. Now, remember that for every degree that you widen that lobe separation out, yes, you're going to get more boost response as far as getting the exhaust gases out and feeding the turbos, but you're also going to stretch that power band out further. So what you end up seeing is that you see a tabletop of power once you start to widen that LSA. It allows you to stay in gears longer. And when you shift, you'll shift and land a little bit better in peak horsepower style numbers for longer. So that's actually, it's good to have a wide LSA and a lot of duration on exhaust, but you have to remember that you're sizing the turbo and you're putting the turbo together for a specific application, and it's really fine tuning where it's at. And the cam that you have, I don't want to give out your specs, I wouldn't do that. But no, the cam that I put together for that car would work very well with the set of turbos. But we can always revisit, look at it, make a few tweaks, and then head out. Might want to add a little bit of duration to it, maybe. But in general, yes. And it would make quite the chunk more power than you're making too, the turbos themselves. Let's see. Demonology is going with HPT turbos. Very nice. The thing with turbos that I've always liked is when they're done right for the street, God, they're so hard to beat. They're so much fun. If you've never driven a turbo, I'll put it to you like this. If you've never driven an old school 2JZ with like a Garrett hybrid 75 millimeter turbo, it's not really the fact that the thing will make about 750 without nitrous to the rear tire. It's just that they're so much fun. When they come on the power, they're just such a rich and a fun driving experience. It's one of the things I kind of miss, you know, back in those days, right there, when it was Viper versus Supra versus Vet. I miss that. And that's also during the two where most of the street cars, you'd be shocked if any of them made more than about 1,000 horsepower at the crank. But no, demonology, we can always take a look at the specs, you know, bump it out maybe a degree and then add, it's kind of splitting hairs really at that point. I think what you've got now would be really good with a set of turbos. Let's see. Let me get back up to you guys. Oh, Hard Rock saying, I'm American street hustle to the core, but when I drive my friend's M5, yeah, they're fast. Any of the twin turbo V8 combinations are fast from either Mercedes-Benz or BMW. So I was checking in with demonology. Jason saying, just got me a 21 Ram, been wanting to turbo it. Would you say it's best to forge for safety reasons? Mostly build for me, not too much racing, just trying to have fun and gain power, cam stall as well. Man, I tell you what. Yeah, I would. Well, I'll put it to you like this. What you have will currently work just fine with what I would consider mild boost, say 7 to 9 PSI. Old school street numbers, if you will. The only thing is that you got to worry about the transmission and everything south of the engine at that point. So I think as long as you're not putting it on the drag strip, you know, you're talking about putting a cam in it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. A stall converter, not necessarily a bad thing if you are running that truck primarily on the street and you want to do rolling burnouts and you're not going to put slicks or sticky Mickeys or hella Hoosiers or nothing like that. Don't put that on the truck and it should be just fine at about that power level. Go much deeper than that, and yeah, you might start seeing some issues. So I'm saying go check out Demonology's channel. Absolutely. If you don't know who Demonology is, go check him out. I'm sure you do. If you're watching this channel, you know that Soul Snatcher's out there putting in work. Kool-Aid checking Demonology. All hail. But thank you for stopping by, my friend. Always good to see you. Holler at me. We will talk about that cam. Kevin saying, I have a 2014 Durango Citadel with a 5.7 Hemi with over 200,000 miles. How long should I hold on to it? Forever. My Ram 1500's got 200,000 miles on it, and I really enjoy driving that thing. In fact, it's probably running better today than it was when I picked it up with around 20. What was it? 20,000 miles, something like that. As long as you don't have any issues with it, I wouldn't sweat it. Main thing is, as long as you're not having any issues with it. Las Vegas living. What's up, everyone? I am new here. I have a Mopar, also custom 2012 Challenger RT. Very nice. Good to see you, my man. Thank you for swinging by. And he's saying, I love Mopar. Same here. Yeah, HPT turbos are good. And the main thing is that, and a lot of guys will ask about AR ratio. What the AR ratio is referring to is the surface area of the mounting flange, in essence, versus the size of the turbo itself, the actual impeller itself. The greater the AR, the more flow you're going to get at the expense of turbo lag. If you stick around, like for street applications, if you're sticking around that, I don't know, 0.80 to 1.15, you'll be fine, perfectly fine. Most guys like to get that 1.0 or 0.94 or 0.9 to 1.0 or 1.0. That'll give you the best overall average performance out of the turbo. What guys will, one mistake guys will make is that they'll go with a tight AR because they think that it's going to be better in general to drive. They go, well, it's going to spool up faster and it's going to do all of that. Yeah, it does. But is that really why you have a turbo car? I mean, you buy a turbo car to feel the thing when it hits. So smaller ARs just don't have the they don't have the flow capability, and so they also just don't have theater that comes with, you know, a higher AR turbo. And as far as what you can expect to get out of a bigger AR, it depends on how much boost you're trying to run, but you know, it could be worth 6 or 8% more horsepower up top, which is not a small number. So I'm saying demonology, twin turbos. Yep. Clay's saying or asking, would you rather turbo or supercharge a stock 2019 5.7 Challenger 6-speed on low boost? Of course. Damn. Well, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. And you guys know too, one of my favorite cars to drive was the E-Force, the Edelbrock E-Force supercharger, which is a Maggie 2650. Low boost, I think it was at 8 or 9 PSI, 5.7 liter with a 6-speed manual. It's an ultra clean install. It is absolutely more power than a 392 in terms of torque, about the same horsepower to the rear wheels. It makes a very fun street car. It sounds good. It looks good. I can't say enough good things about that combination because it's instant power. Now, twin turbo. It's a completely different driving experience, but it will be more powerful. Again, you're going to pick up somewhere around 30 to 50 horsepower to the rear wheel just in efficiency, mind you. So there's that. But horsepower at that point doesn't really mean a lot, especially if you're just out playing around with the car and having fun. If I told you you gained or lost 30 or 40 horsepower because of an efficiency, by the time you figured it out, so to speak, driving experience would take precedence over any number that the thing would put to the ground. Guys, by the way, for me, numbers are really irrelevant. As long as the combination is healthy, that's all that really matters. If the air fuel is right, if the timing's right, they're all going to make whatever power that they're going to make, right? So the main thing to think of is partial throttle, drivability, things of that nature. And a set of small turbos on a 5.7 would be fun, but you'd lose that rush that you get with something more instant, if you will. Another thing, and I would probably, because your car's a 6-speed, I would probably argue that supercharging would be better because you're not going to load up a set of turbos the way that you would with an automatic transmission. Turbos love load, but so do positive displacement superchargers. But the thing is that you've got to keep a turbo loaded for it to keep making power. Positive displacement supercharger, ding, 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 it's instant. So it's my car. My experience has been E-Force that thing, go out there and have a lot of fun. You can't beat the sound of it either. So I'm saying that's going to be interesting to see in the Black Ghost. Oh, you don't know the half of it, brother. Stuart's asking, twin turbos on a 392, good or dumb idea? Good idea. Keep it low in terms of boost, though, because you don't want to make too much power for the HE70 transmission that's sitting behind it. And this is something that a lot of guys would go, oh, well, the 392 doesn't like boost. Oh, my God. It loves boost. What it hates is bad tuning. But every engine loves boost, and every engine makes the same amount of power above naturally aspirated from a percentage place when you start adding boost. They all do. But the main thing that you have to remember is that the 392 has tight ring lands. You can't throw a ton of boost at it unless you pull it apart and open up the ring lands, and that's a complete disaster flick. Nobody's going to do that. And so if it's a stock engine, keep it at around 7 to 8 pounds of boost and it will be happy. If you want more than that, pull the thing apart, put a set of pistons in it, and some and throw in tons of ring gap, about 26 thousandths of ring gap, and put it on corn and make about 800 or 900 horsepower to the rear wheels. This thing just popped in an ad. Oh, let's see. Sorry, I've been in a turbo car before. It was a Chrysler LeBaron. Oh yeah, my very first car had a turbo Dodge 600. You're not going to have much room boost. Yeah, you put that underneath. Oh, Demonology, the owner of HPT, Harry Huska, created Precision Performance Turbos. He created a new company, HPT Turbos, because he has more turbos designs to offer. Very nice. Always good to hear about the new ventures that are out there. What is my computer doing? It's developed a sense of humor. HPT turbos are using 76, 75 twins. Those will be plenty good for, I mean, a comfortable 1,500 horsepower. So, I mean, when you look at it from that point of view, I mean, yes, you can extract more, but, you know, between 15 and 1,700 horsepower, again, is what that size of turbocharger will be able to feed. And then with any other, it just depends on, you know, the type of fuel, the type of what any other power matters that could be involved with this. All of them are, everything is going to take its own tone in the concert of making power. But again, it's never about just turning up the boost. And here's something else to consider too. You know, one of the things that it's, again, they're, you know, because turbos are the cheat code. They make power regardless of altitude. They make power regardless of density altitude. Everything about a turbo, though, is there to complement any efficiency that you have in play. So ported heads, they love it. Big cams, they love it. Nitrous oxide, they love it. Alcohol, they love it. Any type of methanol, they love it. Anything that you can do to make a naturally aspirated engine more efficient, turbos love it. And the reason why, remember what we were just talking about. Turbochargers do not use the power stroke to turn the turbos the way that they use the power stroke to turn a supercharger. They use the exhaust stroke. And what happens when you start adding big fuel mass, like with alcohol or methanol? What happens if you're adding more fuel along with more air in terms of nitrous oxide? What does that mean? It means you have more exhaust gas mass, which means for the same amount of time that that exhaust valve is open, you've got more thicker air coming out of there, hits that exhaust turbine and gives it even that much more punch and spools it up even that much faster. So again, turbos are the cheat code for everything that you can do to an engine that you can make more power with it. It does nothing but benefit. So what do you say? Well, what? It doesn't benefit a supercharged car? No, it doesn't. Not like it does a turbo. And the reason why it doesn't is, remember, the supercharged car requires the power stroke to drive the supercharger compressor itself. That is load. Mechanical load is the same as throwing timing at that thing. So what do? You have to pull timing back as you are throwing more, say, nitrous at a supercharged application. But you're also, the heat that's generated in that combustion chamber just goes to waste out the exhaust. So you've got to detune the engine more. Now, it's not to say that you are detuning or not moving timing when you throw nitrous on turbos. Of course you do, but you're doing that because you just don't need the timing. You'll be overtimed at that point. But with an engine that is utilizing the nitrous to draw the piston down, well, that's extra mass in the cylinder. That's taking up space of air in essence. You're going to have to dial the timing back either way. And so what happens is yes, you make more power, but the turbocharger will make more power exponentially higher. That's why I'm saying turbos are crazy cheat code. And it's something that a lot of guys, well, it's hard to describe how much more power that turbos can make, but there's always a catch, right? There's always a catch. Remember we were talking about throttling with the turbo application. Turbos, especially if they're big turbos, don't like to get throttled. Remember, the second you come off a throttle, you lose exhaust. And when you lose exhaust, you lose the driving force behind the turbocharger. The way I used to like to explain it is like, it's like you're riding a jet ski. Have you ever been riding a jet ski and you just take your hand off the throttle and you try to turn? It doesn't work. Or you're riding a jet ski, you let off on the throttle and then you hit that throttle again. There's that delay, the lag, and then you get moving. That's what it's like when you try to pedal a turbo car. There's a lag. So when you need the power, it's not there. And then when it comes on, it ramps up and it hits extremely hard. That's the only issue with turbos. It's both a blessing and a curse. And again, in this business, there ain't no free lunch, and that's where that difference lies. But yeah, the 76, 75 twins will be nice. Tyron saying he got hit with the ad. Yep, those will pop up. Itches in. Good day. Hard Rock's asking, E85 system run good with turbos? They run really good with turbos. Oh, he's saying I already answered it. Yep. Stuart's asking, how about the E-Force on the 392? E-Force on 392 is, I wouldn't recommend it, because now you're talking about spending money on a supercharger on an engine that's already an 11-to-1 supercharger or 11-to-1 compression. You're talking about putting together an engine transmission combination that is simply not going to hang on for the long haul if you ever put a sticky tire on it. But you can, but I would just probably not recommend it. Not because the engine doesn't like the power, it does, but I just don't think you'd ever be able to truly be able to use it, because where it's going to want to make power and where it's going to want to be real snappy is going to be at a spot where, well, if you're on a sticky tire, you can break stuff. But I will tell you this, the cam that's in a 392 would love a small boost supercharger. It's basically the same thing as a Hellcat cam. It's just that the Hellcat cam has significantly more exhaust duration. Demonology's asking, how much horsepower do I get out of my Hurricane Straight 6 build for roadkill nights by adding nitrous? How much would I recommend? So the way that that engine is set up, it's got small turbos and it's meant to spool up kind of fast. So what I would say is I would look to hit it. I would use the tried and true 30% method. If you've got a 500 horsepower engine, hit it with 150 shot of nitrous. And I think that it would be okay at that level. In the 30% rule, guys, for you guys that may not be aware, back in the day, whenever you would call up a speed shop and ask, hey, how much nitrous can such and such handle? They would typically tell you, sometimes they would tell you half of what that advertised power was on your engine. This is back when engines didn't make a whole lot of horsepower and you could hit them harder with nitrous. But nowadays it's a little bit different. But for the engine for roadkill nights, the only thing that would keep me from throwing really much more at it, if I'm being honest, you could probably hit it. I don't know how robust the fuel system is. If you can dial in more fuel, you would probably be okay, but you're going to have to do a draw. You're going to have to do, you're going to have to do a draw through nitrous setup. So a wet system drawing through the turbos, not too bad. Might run into a bit of a distribution issue with that, but I would say 25 to 30% max. So say 100 to 150 shot max with that. Typically those types of systems do really well. The only one issue with that engine is that it is direct injected, and there's no provision, if I'm not mistaken, for port injection. So what I would do there is I would, you know what? I would not do a draw through with it now that I'm thinking about it, because you're trying to run 22 to 24 PSI of boost through that thing. So you're going to want to run an individual runner style plate setup. So it's going to take a little bit of fabrication, which would work out fine. Just don't ever forget to, you know, purge down your system, all of that whenever you're running those direct port systems. But I would still stick around that 150-ish shot. Don't do a draw through. It's going to beat the hell out of the turbos to do that, because they're spinning real fast to make that kind of power. Those turbos are small on those engines. I'm just kind of thinking this through. Y'all are listening to my thought process playing itself out here. So for me, wet kit, running on race gas. That's the other thing. I don't know that I would try to get it to run on corn, but I would put it on MS-109, and I would run a separate fuel system for the nitrous kit. Just don't forget that you're dealing with a lot of boost, and adjust your fuel pressure accordingly. So your nitrous kit is going to have to probably run at, because you're going to be running 22 PSI, and you're going to be running it in a manifold application, not a draw through, you're going to need to be somewhere around 65 to 75 PSI for your fuel system. So just don't forget that, because remember, your boost pressure is going to be working against your fuel injectors on that nitrous system. So word to the wise, make sure your first hits are somewhere around, I'd say 60 PSI. Oh, Hard Rock saying, I think the Pro Charger would be better for my 392 over E-Force. Well, we've done a ton of Pro Chargers on 392s, and works out great. And there is no launch control with a Pro Charger. Don't even worry about that. It doesn't work that great with it as it sits. We never did run it at the track. Very rarely, at least. But yeah, for the straight six on roadkill, yeah, I would do. There is no way to do it as a direct port, but you can, I think, hit the plim. I'd have to see the engine, but yeah, the guys are going to definitely want to do that type of a setup. Don't forget your fuel pressure, though. It's something that's easy to forget. And but you will need to ramp it up to match the boost pressure coming out the back end. Demonology, you're very welcome. Thanks for hanging out, man. It's always good to hang out with you, my friend. But yeah, Hard Rock, one of the deals there, though, again, it's just what the transmission can manage, what it can help, or rather what it can deal with, and what can help that is the softer hit of the Pro Charger. And speaking of Pro Chargers, you know, the Pro Chargers get a lot of love in racing. They've gotten more and more love than turbos late. The reason for that, remember that drivability thing that we were talking about just a hot minute ago? Well, it does come up in racing. The cool thing about a Pro Charger is that they're a soft hit. There's no ramp up the way that there are with turbos, although that can be tuned around a little bit with turbo timers and things like that. But the main thing with a centrifugal supercharger is that it is always linear in how it makes power. There's never any big, dip or rise. And what that means is that it acts just like a big naturally aspirated engine when you're driving it, and you just pulley it to whatever kind of power that you need it to make. If you need that thing to, you're at altitude and you got to spin that supercharger harder to make the power that you need to make, well, you just put a different pulley on it, and there you go. It really is that easy. And there's other controllers for centrifugal superchargers, just like there are for turbos. Guys have toyed around with adjustable waste gates to where, they will literally pulley the crap out of a Pro Charger and then dump boost. Totally doable. Not that it's a good idea for that on a crank-driven supercharger, but you can do it. There's a lot of options when it comes to that make the car a lot more drivable and a lot more consistent and predictable. But consistent, predictable, reliable, that's all adorable stuff to say, but everybody gets nervous when the turbo car shows up to the party. What? Demonology. Oh, you're welcome for the expertise. Sorry, demonology. Somehow YouTube blocked wet shot. Had to let it through. That's funny. Let's see. But yeah, you'd definitely be running a wet shot. And I would run it on MS-109. Let's see. Jay saying, my 2021 Ram is an e-torque. Can you shine light on if I would run into any problems trying to mod my Ram? I have my cam kit I never used on my Charger. Have a stall, trying a turbo, build or tune problems. Man, look, I ended up getting rid of my e-torque truck. I took a bath on that thing, and I started having problems with the e-torque system. At least it felt like I was. One of the issues with e-torque is that there's something else going on. It's all driven by the body control module. And so you would get the thing kick on, would try to charge at weird times. The truck would just feel lethargic for seemingly no reason. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of moved away from that system. If I didn't have an e-torque truck, there's a chance I'd probably still have that thing. I will say this. Would there be any issues? Man, I don't think so. I don't know of anybody that's had any issues, but you got to remember, a lot of guys simply aren't doing anything with the e-torque platform. And by the way, it doesn't do anything for performance. I've proven that time and time again. And I even tried to see if there was any way that I could dig into that operating system somewhere, if there was some way to make that e-torque system work, and there really, frankly, wasn't. Like I say, the only problems that you may have is just where do you put stuff. I mean, e-torque it's a big alternator, basically. If it gets in the way of something, maybe. But aside from that, in the actual software, no, you wouldn't run into any issues there that I could find. Hard Rock saying Modern Red is doing good on the road with his new 392 swap. Very cool. Needs a new torque converter. Boys are out racing. Very nice. SCW is out. Yep. Tell everybody over there I said hello. But yeah, talking about turbos, it's kind of funny. What's weird is, so back in the day, everybody ran some kind of a turbo on something at some point. Whether it was an LS powered Trans Am doing a rear mount, those were real popular for a long time. There's turbo kits for pretty much everything and anything that's out there. And they can be a lot of fun. It can be very rewarding to run turbo systems, but they can be a bit complex. They can get in the way. They can actually be a bit cumbersome to install. And so again, for every benefit, there's always going to be a trade-off. You get all the efficiency, you get all of the cheat code access with a turbo, but man, the install is typically messy, and in some cases, it can be downright inconvenient. You get, low slung turbos, they suck in road funk, and, oiling systems and all of that start coming into play because you have to oil the bearings and the turbos. It can be a mess. It certainly can. If you are patient and you've got the funds, because keep in mind, turbo kits are always the most expensive if they're done right. It's all because of plumbing and install. And again, the aforementioned oiling systems and all of that. All of that is going to take its toll. But again, if you want the most power out of the least amount of boost, turbo really is the only way to go. And the OE manufacturers see that. And that's why when I put that video out earlier and I was saying, you know, maybe the Hurricane 6 is the right engine to go with. But it also might not be the right engine. And there's another side to that coin. And I need to put that video together, but it basically goes like this. Yeah, the 3-liter is worldwide marketable. It's the right displacement to not get hit with like the displacement tax where some areas do that. But here's the thing. That engine, when I drove it in the truck that I drove, was a turd. Like it was not, unless you had your foot buried in it. And then it was, oh, here's all the power. One of the funny things that I noticed with that truck was, you know, somebody had mentioned in the video, well, you know, TFL truck did this thing and it went 0 to 60 in 5.6 seconds. And somebody goes, that's impressive at altitude. The minute they say that, it's, you don't know how turbos work. You don't know how this compressor works. That's not impressive, because at altitude, here's another party trick that turbos have. Remember when I told you that turbos make the same manifold pressure regardless of what the atmosphere is? If your wastegate is set to 10 pounds, that turbo is going to spool up and it's going to compress air until it hits 10 pounds, where that wastegate will start to open at 10 pounds of boost. That is regardless of what atmospheric pressure is, the actual kPa. It doesn't matter what the barometric pressure is. If there's enough air there to get that spring to open, you get 10 pounds, and it's not delta pressure. It's measured pressure, okay? If that's the case, the air is thinner in Denver. The air is thinner at altitude, which means you're making output power, your factory rated output power, and your wind resistance is significantly less. How much less? Well, if the kPa is only 85, it means that your wind resistance is 15% lower. So at 100 miles per hour, your wind resistance is that of you going 85. But you're making rated power. Again, turbo cheat code. The hits just keep on coming. Anyway, I digress. Jason's asking, hey, B, can you give me a quick rundown on the HP 70 versus 75? Going from my Charger with the 70 to the Ram with the 75, I believe. Does the 75 perform better and handle more horsepower, or not much? Not much. So what you're looking at, 70 Newton meters of torque versus 75 or 700 perform 700 Newton meters of torque, which is basically 500 foot-pounds of torque, give or take, with the HP 70 to 750 Newton meters of torque with the 75, which is a little bit more, right? It's less than 10% more torque resistant, if you will. But what are the differences? HP 75 has a much more aggressive first gear and second gear than the HP 70 does. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth are practically identical, like they're statistically identical. Seventh and eighth, however, are more of an overdrive in the HP 75. So you have a significantly more aggressive first gear. I think it's 5-1. Second gear is also more aggressive than the 70. And again, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, the same. And then seventh and eighth are more of an overdrive. So that's it in a nutshell. As far as, you know, is it underrated? Some people say it's an underrated transmission, that it can actually handle quite a bit more than that 750 Newton meters that it's advertised at. Kind of like the way that the HP 90, which is rated at like 650 foot-pounds of torque, which is laughable because those things survive at well higher than that. I don't know if the 75 can do that. The 70 is certainly not there. The 70 is legit, like 500, 550 foot-pounds of torque to the rear wheels, and that thing will start to slip a little bit. Sovereign saying, oh, the TFL video you sent me. Yep, that's the one you sent me. And I had a lot of questions on that because there's that video, right? But who's the dude, and you might know this, Sovereign, who's the dude that did the back-to-back standard output, high output, or whatever it was, and he was in the 7-second range, also at altitude, also at 87 octane, I'm guessing. Whatever that truck came with, factory fill, that truck was not very good. Oh, so the TFL thing, this is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. So here's the thing. First of all, it needed to be the same driver in both of the trucks with the same launch technique. I didn't quite see that, although they were saying they were holding the brake and the gas for as much of it as they could. Okay, I guess you did that, but anyway, I spooled the one up that I drove, and I spooled mine up to about 13 or 1500 RPM, give or take, and then just drilled it. They talked about a real world test. Is that really real world? I mean, how often do you have that opportunity? If you're racing, I guess you're trying to get a number out of it. But again, they were talking about real world. Why not run the fuel in it that the manufacturer recommends, which is 91? That's one of the problems that I had with the TFL truck video, is that they didn't go by what the manufacturer states to get optimum power. They go, well, it's real world, and they're putting in the bad, or the 87. They're at altitudes. So they have 85, 87, and 91. The reason why I keep saying 91 for that engine is because it's a truck. If you need to haul anything, if you're towing something, the last thing you want to do is run 87 octane in the thing, because it's going to be knock sensitive when you're loaded. And also too, guys, 87 octane and 85 octane at altitude is only for naturally aspirated engines. The reason why they offer up lower octane up at those altitudes is that there's a lower knock sensitivity because there's less oxygen available. So you can use a gasoline with less octane. Why they even make that, though, is beyond me. But anyway, that's the why behind that. But for me, I would never run one of those engines because it's going to make the same boost at altitude that it does at sea level. So run the thing on 91 octane and then have the driver spool it up the same way and make the hits that way. I would have preferred to see something like that, but we can all complain about the results. And look, the results are what they are. But I've seen reports on that engine in that truck all over the board. Oh, and here's point number 2. The truck that TFL tested was a 3.92 geared truck. And it went 5.670 to 60 with a hard brake stand. Okay, guys. And it did it at altitude, which means that it should have done even better because it had thin air and it's making all of the peak boost that it needs to make its power. Okay. Gentlemen, at sea level, not at altitude, but at sea level and on corn, my truck goes 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds, not 5.67. It runs mid to low 13s. Like 1340 would be a meh pass in that truck in cooler air on corn. Now, granted, I'm playing to the strengths of the F-150, but the point that I'm making is this. Guys, please, pretty please, with sugar on top, that truck needs to be run on premium because it is so inconsistent. 87 octane at lower altitude was not a good running engine when I drove it. The guy that did the test, and you guys have seen this, and I'm so sorry that I cannot remember the guy's name. I'm absolutely screwing up here. But anyway, the other guy that did the testing, his testing was at 7 seconds, 0 to 60. That is forever to get to 60. Again, mine was 6.33. TFL did 5.67. And the dude that did his independent testing had 7 seconds. somebody sent me something from Motor Trend. So they hit a 5 flat or something like that and ran 1370 at 98 miles an hour, which makes absolutely no sense unless they hit a real hard speed limiter at about the 1,000-foot mark of 98.7 miles per hour. So there's that. But I mean, realistically speaking, guys, look, that's turbos in a nutshell. The cheat code that you didn't even know you wanted, and a lot of people don't realize that the turbocharged engine just has a much more broad, I guess the right word to use is base, or envelope of performance based on density, altitude, and altitude than a naturally aspirated engine. I'll give you another example. I made in the video that I put out saying, this might be the best engine for the truck. I gave the example of the Lycoming aircraft engine. I actually gave the wrong engine though. It's actually a Lycoming 541 that I was referencing, not a Lycoming 510, but it's a Lycoming 541. And that engine technically makes advertised power up to 15,000 feet, but that's beside the point. But the thing is that what I was alluding to when I was talking about that is just how much of a difference the turbocharger really does make when you're talking about being able to run advertised actual performance numbers at altitude. You can only do that with a turbocharger. And again, it's just the envelope that you can make, the differences in density, altitude that turbos don't care about. That's why manufacturers are going to it, because they have naturally aspirated engines. You can't do that with them, and they will suffer at altitude where the boosted stuff doesn't. I also didn't mention the Pikes Peak stuff. Garrett has a really good, I think it was Garrett, wasn't it Garrett? Write-up on turbos and turbo sizing and how turbos work at sea level versus altitude. It's pretty good stuff. Let's see. Hard Rock saying I should just leave my Scat Pack NA. Yeah, don't try to get nutty with it. And if you ever did decide to throw a lot of power at it, you would have to HP 70 and drive shaft swap. Sovereign saying NA would be great for me. Absolutely. Hard Rock saying that Modern Red swap to an HP 90. Okay. I would, if you're talking about going any kind of decent enough number, swap to an HP 90. HU saying boosted engines are very octane sensitive. For example, the 2.3 EcoBoost engine loses 40 horsepower with 87 octane as opposed to 93. I believe it. Not sure what the video is, Sovereign. Oh, there it is. 737 versus 7.0, 0 to 60. HO versus regular. Yeah. That's that's what I was talking for the Wagoneer. Yeah. That's what I was talking about, is that, he was doing the testing. Granted, it's not a truck, but yeah, 7.37 seconds versus 7.0. Yeah, those are the only tests of the engine that I could find floating around out there. Oh, Hard Rock. Yeah, your 392 is designed to run on nothing but premium. Absolutely. But yeah, you're right. That was a Wagoneer, the JB reviews. Yeah, and I wanted to reference that because, look at the difference. There's not, in that respect, there's not a lot that walks in lockstep with my experience with that HO in that video either. That's something else that I wanted to mention is, boys, that HO that I drove was something to talk about. And in the video where I'm driving home after driving that Wagoneer, it's no joke. That engine, if it's rated at 500, it's more like 600. Like I would have believed it. That's how strong that thing was. So again, does that mean that maybe they put regular gas in that thing? I in the one that JB did. I don't know, man. I don't know. But I can tell you that, man, when you start to dissect it and you start to look at, the performance envelope, the one that I drove felt like it went 0 to 60 in like a hard 5.7 or 5.8. Like that's how good that thing ran. And I mean, it was hard right off the hit, where the standard output that I drove wasn't. And again, you can say, well, I didn't brake torque it, blah, blah, blah. Guys, I didn't brake torque the HO either. I just loaded the chassis and drilled it just like I did with the truck. And I did that specifically to get an idea for an A-B comparison. Didn't work out. HU saying turbo cars will run on 87. Fords, the boost controller will limit boost when running 87. SHO boost was limited to 10 pounds. I run 93 and boost is 15. My ETs went from high 13s to mid 12s. Oh yeah. No, there's nothing saying that you can't run them on 87 octane. It's just that you're talking about 10 pounds of boost. I would love to see what the standard output Hurricane 6 does, what it does when it encounters 87 octane, because it feels like it was reduced to about 10 pounds of boost. Again, when it came on the boil, though, it came on strong, but there is definitely limiters in play. And again, for whatever it's worth, the manufacturer states clearly in the owner's manual that, and it doesn't mention 89. We keep seeing this 89 octane number get floated out there for the SO. The owner's manual doesn't read anything about 89 octane, not for the standard output, the SO. They mention 91 or better. And that's my understanding. What it is rated at is 91 or better. Now, the Hemi, on the other hand, is rated at 89 horsepower, 89 octane to make the horsepower and torque that it's rated for. It states clearly in the owner's manual that that's the case. So again, I'm a bit flummoxed as to why it's driving me nuts. And how is it that we've got such a broad spectrum on these things? But yeah, the Wagoneer at 7.0 versus 7.3. I remember he had driven something. So yeah, the truck would be a little bit quicker. But that's the end of all that I could find on the Hurricane. And and that's the other thing. So I did put out the video. Why aren't people draggy testing these things? If not taking them to an actual drag strip, whatever. Okay, fine. Draggy them 0 to 60. You don't even have to do the whole quarter mile thing and shit. They're going to hit a speed limiter anyway. At least run it through the 8th mile. We're not seeing anything like that with that engine. I guess the point that I was making in that video is, look, you didn't buy this thing because you want to be all, innovative and I'm an early adopter. And no. You bought it for the power numbers. That's why you bought the thing. So put something out, please, somebody. And one other thing, guys have asked, well, why don't I post up the draggy video that I did with the truck that I drove? Well, first of all, I just collected data. Now, technically, yeah, I guess you could say there's a video, only that I had the video rolling, but I'm not shooting anything in the truck. That's a couple of reasons. One, it's to protect the dealership. Because they kind of frown on it if you're out beating on their equipment. And I didn't want to get the sales guy in any kind of hot water either. So I kept that pretty cool. But no, I mean, it's a legit result. And I mean, I went back to back and within 15 minutes, I was already running the F-150. And that F-150 was still fairly well heat soaked, had a high manifold temp when I made that hit, and it damn near went sub 6 seconds on the 0 to 60. So Both trucks were subject, though, to the same criteria. Both of them were as heat soaked as the other, and those were the results. So, you know, maybe one result might be a little overly optimistic. I don't know. But anyway, results are what they are. Do with the data what you will. But I'm still kind of, as a consumer of the data and as a consumer of the YouTubes, I want to see more of it out there. It's interesting. I like this kind of stuff. Let's see how they do. Let's see. Oh, JB was using a Dragy. Yeah, he was using a Dragy. It's the only other one I've found. And it was a Wagoneer, for crying out loud. Oh, for some reason, I had it in my head that there were the trucks, but you're right. It was the Wagoneer now that I'm thinking about it. Red Dog saying, sup, dude? Sup, Red Dog? CJ, for me, I'll stick to the NAVA. A lot of guys will. And that's nothing wrong with that at all. Let's see. But again, as far as turbos go, the guys, nothing makes horsepower, nothing makes torque the way that a turbo does as far as efficiency. Again, that's why you see them in marine applications, industrial applications, commercial applications. You just don't see superchargers, or rarely would you see one. And if you do see one, it's on a 2-stroke diesel, and that thing's just there to move air too. Yeah, there's a small amount of boost that it helps it to create, but typically they're feeding an engine that's feeding turbos. That's a secondary air injection pump, not a supercharger. But that's why you always see turbos. But again, the upside, lots of efficiency making power. Downside, they don't like being throttled, and, well, they can be a bit of a headache when you're talking about actually packaging all of that stuff into an engine compartment. But do it right, and you'll be rewarded with the most power that you can possibly make, just provided that, well, you never want to get out of the throttle, if nothing else. But with that, guys, looks like we are coming up on about just the other side of an hour. Red Dog's got a question. Say, hey, I got a friend that has a Challenger 6-cylinder and wants to put cutouts in the exhaust, thinking that won't make a difference to sound. Thoughts? Yeah, please don't do that. For God's sake, please don't do that. It's going to sound awful. CJ's saying, now if these turbo engines are so good, then how come Ford used the 6.8 liter and the 7.3 liter Godzilla V8s and the Super Duty as base gas engines, not the 3.5 EcoBoost V6? A couple of reasons. It's the same reason that the 6.4 liter in the Ram 1500s exists in the way that it does. And that is because the larger V8 can manage higher loads without going into power enrichment mode, where the 6-cylinder would basically be staying boost and would stay in power enrichment. And in that scenario, they're not as fuel efficient as their naturally aspirated, much larger engine counterparts. One way you can think of a 3.5 liter EcoBoost engine, it makes about 15 pounds of boost. By the way the crow flies, that's 1 atmosphere. And eliminating and just kind of throwing out some of the ancillary parasitic losses, it in essence makes a 3.5 liter engine a 7 liter engine. The same way that the 3 liter at what is in essence 2 bar of boost in the HO variant at 540 horsepower, that's regular atmosphere plus 2 bars, that's times 3. So that's a 9 liter engine in terms of how much air capacity it's bringing in. But it obviously is doing that at peak boost, so you can't really call that. And the 3.5 liters doing its work at peak boost, but you can't really call it there either. Whereas the 7.3 and the 6.8, they're always churning, always burbling along. So they all have their proper application. For making horsepower in small bursts, yes, you'd want to go with the gas turbocharged engine. But just like any Caterpillar diesel that's out there, they're all inline 6-cylinder turbo diesels. And those are for just parking the thing at a certain RPM and chugging along and dragging a load. And in that case, you would want a diesel. And you would want a diesel because it's going to have a higher specific output at the lower RPM, and it's just more efficient at doing that type of work. Now, the big block gas engines, they're good because they're not very high horsepower or torque engines. They just make what I would call cruise power, and can make it indefinitely. And they have huge radiators to help them out with the heat. So that's basically it. So I'm saying, have a good night, everyone. DM, thank you very much. Appreciate that, buddy. Say, B, you're awesome. Have a great night. Thanks for all you do. You put a lot of good out in the world. Man, I truly appreciate that, DM. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that a ton. Appreciate the kind words even more so. So thank you very much for that. But thank you very much. Red Dog saying, not laughing at the 6-cylinder though. Yeah. Ditto B in demonology. Yes. And thank you, demonology, for coming and hanging out with us. You guys that don't know, I did put demonology's camshaft together for the Soul Snatchers. So there is a little bit of B Mason in there, but you got B Mason in there calling the shots for those valves in that Soul Snatcher. So every victory for demonology is a victory for us, guys. So support him. Support him seriously, guys. He's out there doing a lot, and he's a great friend to the community. But yeah, every win that he gets, I get a little bell rung for me a little bit too. I love it. And that turbo setup is going to be sick. But again, DM, thank you so much, man. I do appreciate it. But guys, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you guys don't have any more questions, I did want to talk a little bit about turbos though, just because there's so much, so many manufacturers are moving to that type of architecture. I wanted to get out there a little bit for some knowledge for you. I know that these long form videos and live shows, I mean, listen, they are the sure cure for insomnia, if nothing else. And look, it's your favorite background car related, noise generator, if nothing else. So, but anyway, if you like this, on the next show, ask me some more questions. I can elaborate on a little bit of this then too. But with that, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. Hey, listen, y'all, get out there and do something cool for somebody. Chances are they need it way more than you realize. And with that, guys, that is a wrap. Thank you all so much. We will see you on the next one.